I don't know how many of you all are American, but David Letterman used to have David Letterman was a very popular late night talk show host. And many years ago when I was young, I was in college, he used to be on NBC really late night. And if a guest didn't show up, the running joke was Marv Albert, who was a sportscaster for the local news show, he was the emergency guest. So on Friday, I got an email from the content team here at the Linux Foundation, and they said, hey, we had some speakers cancel. Can you give a talk? So here I am, the emergency guest, the emergency speaker. So what we did this at FOSDEM, and it was really successful. We had a really good conversation. Basically what we wanted to do was get people together to talk about open source and automotive. I gave a brief talk, 10-minute talk yesterday about AGL and some of the lessons learned over the last 10 years about AGL and what we've done and how we've done some things. But really what we want to draw on is what's the future and how do we improve collaboration within open source and in automotive going forward. So this isn't a presentation, it's a discussion. That's the first thing. Ideally, you'd all move forward a little bit so we can all chat, but we do have a handheld mic that we'll pass around. Please use the microphone when speaking. That way it gets captured on everybody can hear you, and it gets captured on the recording. And I just had a couple, maybe more than a couple, like 3 or 4 kind of starting discussion topics. So yesterday, in addition to my talk on automotive, Kusakabe-san from Honda gave a talk about the AGL software-defined vehicle platform. So it's reference platform, or what we're hoping to call SODEV. And really, software-defined vehicles have been kind of a hot topic in automotive for a few years now. And so, kind of maybe the first question. Sorry, but the HDMI cable is like a little loose here. So, what ideas do you have for improving SDV collaboration in automotive for SDV, software-defined vehicles? And if nobody speaks up, I'm going to call on people. So just be aware.
I mean, I'll just say, up front, I'm pretty ignorant. But what are the pain points right now in collaboration? Is it just people are siloed in their own organizations and don't feel the need to collaborate across organizations, or what?
So here's my answer, and other people feel free to answer. I think Ishii-san has an opinion here. So I kind of felt pre-pandemic that the automotive world had kind of consolidated into just a couple of organizations looking at open source stuff, Automotive Grade Linux and Covisa. And we each had our little niche, and we were collaborating. And we still are collaborating, for that matter. I feel like in the last 6 years, there's been this explosion of different groups who are all creating projects that are open or quasi-open. And we have a finite number of people in the world who are available, willing, and able to work on this stuff. And we're kind of spreading them out among, AGL, Sophie, Eclipse SDV, Covisa, SDV Alliance, you name it. There's all these projects. And there's not that many people to work on this stuff. And so I really, that's kind of my opinion. The other issue that I see is there's a cultural issue that I kind of talked about yesterday during my lessons learned talk, which is the automotive companies, especially the tier ones. I used to work for Motorola and then Continental. We never collaborated on anything with anybody, right? Panasonic, they were the enemy. LG, they were the enemy. Name someone. And so even today, you have this cultural thing where everything is secret, and we don't want to help the other guy. And there's also this culture in automotive, and it's probably a lot of big companies, aerospace, where it's just difficult for them to figure out how I'm a guy and I have some code and I'm interested in contributing it. Well, how do I do that in the context of my company?
Yeah, that makes sense. One more question on that, kind of related. I was at your Lightning talk yesterday. You flashed up a bunch of manufacturers that have collaborated on Automotive Grade Linux. I don't think I saw any American manufacturers. Is that right? Or
not at the moment.
Okay.
In the past, Ford has been a member. We are talking to some American manufacturers right now, but not at the moment. Yeah.
Gotcha.
Yeah, it's primarily Europe and Japan right now.
I yield my time.
Stephanie, right?
It is. Good memory. So, in my organization, we work with a dozen OEMs, all defining their SDV, and I see two primary problems. One, there's no consistency on what SDV even means.
Yes.
They all have their own recipe that they're trying to shake and bake behind closed doors. They're reinventing the wheel and sometimes creating additional sins back there. There's some that are defined, and they're signing up for all of those and adding some in the meantime. And the second thing that I see going on is, in a perfect world, they could focus on creating platforms and build on the platforms and focus on things that touch their end user. That's where the end game needs to be. Instead, they're focused on, well, I want to invent my own platform with my own flavor, and the end user doesn't even know what it looks like. They honestly don't care. If they push on the right pedal and it goes and the left pedal stops, fantastic, but they are not focusing on the user experience, which is, in the end, what is going to sell cars in the future.
I'll tell you a story from 2009 when Geneva was first formed, and I was at Continental, and I was running the Linux platform team there. And we eventually delivered products to Mercedes-Benz, Linux-based products to Mercedes-Benz. And we had the first Geneva all-member meeting, and they sent me to it. And at the time, Geneva thought they were going to just focus on the kernel. And I said, that's ridiculous. I got up at the all-member meeting like this. I said, that's just patently ridiculous. The customer doesn't care about the kernel. The customer doesn't care about what telephony API you use. I said, so what would make everybody's life easier as a tier one is if all you OEMs in the room could agree that we're all going to use Linux with Qt, with this, with that. Because at the end of the day, what you care about is making a Chrysler feel like a Chrysler and making a Honda feel like a Honda, et cetera. And none of this other stuff matters. And I went around the room to all the OEM members in that room, and I said, so what do you think? Is that a great idea or what? And they all said, we don't agree. They all, and this is a problem a little bit even to this day, but they all felt like this underlying technology was super special. And I said, take the example of, if you're familiar with it back in the day, most. It was supposed to be a standard. It was supposed to solve all these problems. It was really the first, you would call it now an SDV, right? Distributed function blocks that you could move around the car. And there were standard function blocks, and nobody could even, no two manufacturers implemented the function blocks the same. And I said, so me, as Continental, I have to have 4 different teams for 4 different OEMs that all implement most differently. That's ridiculous, right? But it's still a problem that everybody thinks that their stuff is special. So that's a way of saying I completely agree. Don't make me do this. Like, now I can't remember your name.
Yes. If you were pointing at me anyways.
Yeah.
All right. So I guess a couple of points here. As I spent 2 decades at GM, so lots of history there with the legacy auto manufacturers. Certainly in that period as well that you were working at Continental. For collaboration, so the last 8 years of my career there were focused on open source. Regarding collaboration, one of the first things, most of my career, exactly like you said, The auto OEMs are very siloed, not a lot of collaboration across different OEMs and wanting to collaborate on different projects until, I don't know if anyone in this room is familiar with AutoSAR? Mm-hmm. You've heard about, okay.
I'm more than familiar with it.
Okay, well, all right. So once AutoSAR got to the adaptive platform, so there was the first iteration of AutoSAR, then the next iteration was, I think, called the adaptive platform. We actually formed this group called the Open Source Control Board. And that was the first time ever in automotive I had ever seen. It was GM, Ford, Volkswagen, Continental, Bosch, Daimler, all these big automotive players. What I thought it was very successful. What I haven't seen so far is any type of collaboration like that with SDV. I'm kind of surprised. I left GM about the time that SDV was being developed. So I don't know what's happened today, but it really reminds me of something we heard yesterday at the keynote. Collaborate on the core, compete on the edge.
Right. So what we've announced that within Automotive Grade Linux is we want to develop this SDV reference platform where we do develop that core on hardware, and we have Honda and Toyota and Panasonic and a bunch of the AGL members that are interested in. We're starting to collaborate on that. And we're involving, tier 1s and tier 2 suppliers. Red Hat has been talking to us through the ELISA project. So we've got a lot of interest in basically developing this core. That's really what we want to try to get to in the next few years. The one advantage, I will say, advantage of AGL is we're terrible at writing specs. Right? Other groups love writing specs. We're happy to take a spec and help you implement it. So we're not going to argue with you about a spec. Anybody? I saw someone else's hand. We'll start with, I think he had his hand up first. So we'll go with, we'll call him Guy in the back.
Hi, yeah. I was at DEF CON last August, and a big topic of discussion was the security that runs on these cars, or the lack of security. I'm curious, I was at your lightning talk yesterday, on your perspective of how these car manufacturers see security, or when they have vulnerabilities that people bring to them, and it seems like they are reluctant to fix them at times. I don't know if you've dealt with this at all.
I'll say this, Automotive Grade Linux, while we're very interested in security, obviously, and we're looking at CVEs that are coming down, from upstream down to us and incorporating them and getting the fixes out as fast as possible. What our OEM members have told us in the past is that they believe that end-to-end security is their issue, and so we have not focused too much on building in security into the AGL platform other than some basic SE Linux type controls. That they believe end to end that they own that, and so we've not really been focusing on it too much. Brian? Oh wait, I think Gary.
Okay, I'll go next. So I'm not a part of the AGL or automotive community, so apologize if this is out of scope and perhaps too out of the box or whatever, but I look at certain trend lines, right? Like the rise of the EV companies in China. I look at drone code, which started as a hobbyist platform and is now key to Ukraine's success on the battlefield. I look at things like right to repair. I look at things even like the question there. And I feel like a gap that has existed has been between the automotive makers and obviously not the mass majority of drivers out there who don't care about what's going on under the hood, although they do care about being able to take their cars into service centers and get them maintained. But between car companies and their lead users, the ones who do like to tinker, the ones who, despite all the firewalls you put up to try to keep this from happening, will root their cars and install alternate hardware, alternate software, or do funny things with them, right? And I feel like there's some untapped potential. If the question is improving collaboration around SDVs, is there an audience wider than the automotive makers who certainly could be downstream consumers of this for their home hobbyist, projects, their home vehicles that they're tinkering on or building, or, think about every hobbyist who is a classic car collector who is now upgrading them to EVs, right? And other funny things. But maybe even the people who are super fans of their EVs and want to extend them and do funny things with them. Like, I feel like the software layer of that is probably, there's some missed opportunity perhaps to engage with that broader ecosystem. I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, it's interesting that so just before this, we were sitting at a table, Ishii-san and Endo-san and I, and another gentleman overheard our conversation. One of the questions that came up in the automotive panel yesterday is, will there be BYD cars, just as an example, around in 20 years? And they were kind of hemming and hawing about it. And my answer to that is, why not? Because not necessarily a BYD, but EVs just in general are simpler to, outside of take away the software stuff. EVs generally are simpler cars to work on. They're electric motors basically. And the guy who was sitting with us is a and I said nobody in the 1950s who was GM, Ford, Chrysler, they weren't thinking about these cars lasting 20 years. It was all planned obsolescence or unplanned obsolescence. And the guy sitting next to us was like, yeah, I'm restoring a 65 Mustang. And yeah, exactly, you'd be horrified by what you see in these old cars. So I think that I think there is a market for that as these cars get more popular. And I see it in the motorcycle community all the time, where communities come together and reverse engineer the CAN bus for the BMW or upgrade their engine control modules. There's definitely a group of people out there interested who will be happy to help glom onto this if it's done in open source. So that's kind of my answer. I think it's there. I think it is there. And then I just wanted to say about security, and the average person doesn't care about security. They don't until you have that TikTok thing with Hyundai. When all of a sudden you can put your USB key in and steal the car. So yeah, they don't care until that happens. I think, Gary?
Software design vehicle sounds really nebulous. Like, there's so many aspects for the software on a car. Telematics, door control, there's just a lot. Would you guys break that down at all?
Well, so the general idea, and this is, I think, what Kusakabe-san was talking about yesterday, is you'd have more and more of these functions being built into high compute platforms. So your door module and your lower end functionality then gets combined into the same unit that's running your instrument cluster and your IVI and your telematics. And you can move that functionality around with zonal controllers. That's kind of the idea, and especially as you go to, then the other thing that a lot of people talk about with software-defined vehicles is, and this is kind of alluding to my how do we simultaneously guarantee safety, quality, and security for 20 years, is being able to download new features or software updates over the air into these vehicles so that maybe you can enable, maybe your door control maybe your body control module has some new thing it can do. So you can then download a new controller into these high compute platforms. That's very difficult to do today unless you go into the shop and you have a mechanic hook up a CAN connector directly to that unit. I think a lot of people have converged on software-defined platforms, software-defined vehicles as this idea of a lot of post-delivery feature additions and zonal controllers as being the holy grail. But as Stephanie said, you talk to 10 people, you'll get 10 different answers as to what a software-defined vehicle is.
I was thinking, like, for the guidance system for your lane control for some of these newer cars, I don't know if I'd want, I would want to really make sure that that update was
That's the safety
verified.
part. Yeah, it's both safety and security there.
Yeah.
You want to make sure that that update is properly been signed and approved by the manufacturer, and that it's a safe update that is not going to cause your car to crash. And that's the idea behind Tesla with their automotive driving is they're constantly updating the algorithms based on data they're collecting. So then they update new algorithms. Yeah, go ahead.
So regarding your point on the, or your question about the features and everything, I remember when I started in my career at GM, I guess 25 years ago, it was, I remember people arguing, and it blew my mind, over tenths of a cent on
Yes.
parts,
Yeah.
right? 5 years ago, or even currently, it's not uncommon to have 30, 40 different modules in the vehicle. What does each one of those cost? And then the wiring to each of those, and then the labor for each of those once it gets installed in the vehicle. So SDV has this huge cost advantage just when you have these high compute platforms you're able to move these functions to different parts of the vehicle. So just from a cost aspect, makes a lot of sense.
I don't think 99% of the people out there understand the complexity in vehicle wire harnesses.
Oh, yeah.
And how much they cost.
Yeah, pretty insane, yeah.
Hey, quiet down over there. Anybody else have any comments? So this is kind of the general question that we asked last time. What problem has bugged you the most recently, and how can open source be the solution? Wait, we got one back there. Hold on, we need the mic. That's Paulette, she's from Ford.
This is our first open source summit. The
Nice.
biggest problem we're having right now
Yeah?
is cost. So Ford is intentionally looking at giving back to this community,
Yeah.
and that's why I'm here. I'm a team of one.
Ford
But I
used-
hope not to be a team of one
Ford
next year.
Somebody asked about North American automakers. Ford was a member. They've been a member twice and left.
It all goes around who's spearheading it.
I get that,
Yeah.
exactly.
So
Sometimes we deal with big companies, not just Ford, but SOC vendors and whoever. And sometimes when it comes time to figuring out who's going to pay for the membership, they all do this.
yeah, in fact, we have an innovative group who paid for this year's membership, and now it's my job to make sure it gets in the budget for next year.
Well, Paulette, if you have any questions or need any help, you're welcome to contact me. I'll give you I work for the Linux Foundation, so I'm
Yeah, I
happy.
was told to check you out, so
Yeah,
that's why
look
I'm here.
Look at this. I won't tell my wife either.
That's all right. I don't know if anybody else had a question.
Oh, we got one over here.
Hi, my name's Nick. I work at General Motors, and you asked, what's the biggest pain I'm experiencing today? It's proprietary boot chains from certain large SoC vendors.
I feel your pain, buddy. I think we're using the same vendor, and as Ishii-san can attest, we have tried to get a BSP and a boot chain from them for 3 or 4 years now, and they will not agree to open source it. And that same vendor, we created, this is the dumbest thing. So this is how dumb it is in open source sometimes. They have an automotive version of a Bluetooth Wi-Fi chip and a non-automotive version of the same chip. We put the automotive version of that chip on our reference hardware that Panasonic designed and we use everywhere. They would not agree to let us distribute the firmware for the module, even though the non-automotive version firmware is not proprietary. We basically had to kick them off the platform. And this is a constant problem I have with pretty much all the board vendors, and why more and more on AGL we're being forced to focus on QEMU and Raspberry Pi and BeagleBone, because even if someone like NXP or Qualcomm, I won't mention all the names, but even if they announce a board with a new chip and there's going to be an automotive dev board, they're still under NDA, and I can't sign an NDA. Linux Foundation doesn't do that. So I can't sign an NDA. I can't give it to my developers to go develop new features on it. It's a huge problem in the industry in general, but I think in automotive it's really been bad. I've gotten approvals from SOC vendors to get a board, and they want me to sign an NDA, and it dies. So I feel your pain. I think I know who you're talking about, and I don't envy you. Yeah. I guess the session's over.
It's over.
They cut the mics.
Sorry. Okay. All right. Oh, that's much louder. Okay. Hi. I'm Evan. I have nothing to do with the automotive industry at all, but I am a car enthusiast, and I have an older hybrid. And since you asked, the problem that's bugged me the most is access to, since we're here for an open source conference, I don't have any access to any diagnostic tools at all for my car. It's
Not
like
even OBD?
No, I have OBD, but I have a hybrid with tons and tons of modules that nobody reader won't talk to.
Yep.
Right. So
there are open source communities for various vehicles that have reverse engineered that stuff.
Right, but I don't want to reverse engineer. I want to fix my car.
Completely get that. And the conversation we had in the hallway that I was talking about earlier is most of the good stuff in this area where people have reprogrammed their ECUs or whatever they've done with the CAN bus for their vehicle. Almost all that has come from reverse engineering, because again, other than what OBD2 mandates for testing, emissions testing and whatever, I don't know of any automaker that's made all that stuff open.
Right. I'm just saying.
I agree with you. It's a problem. It doesn't make any sense, right? It's just a bunch of codes. Why is it secret? I don't understand.
It's a multi-$1,000 subscription just to find out what code there is.
Yeah.
Right. Oh, GDS? Oh, okay, way back. Gotcha. Yeah, it's just for me, like, I'm just a guy working in my backyard, right? It's $3,000 a year or more just to get codes. That's not feasible.
I agree. It's silly. I'm with you on that. I think we have a few minutes. Any other comments? Oh, we got one more up here.
Can you pass that? Yeah, thank you.
This would be switching gears a little bit, but
no pun intended.
Yeah, there you go. So I work for a firm that does like satellite communication payloads, and there's been some interest in like space grade Linux, right? And there's a lot of they point at automotive grade Linux. I said, look, these guys did it. They actually have a pretty good, pretty successful project right now. Mm-hmm. So I'm just curious from a history perspective, when you're first getting this started, and you're talking with the tier ones, so my side of that would be talking to big primes or kind of the legacy guys.
Right.
What does it look like to get buy-in?
So that was the longer bit. I don't know if you saw my 10-minute one. The long version of that came from a talk I gave at NASA for the Space Grade Linux guys in December. The buy-in came initially from Toyota and JLR, and the most influential person was Murata-san at Toyota. We had a very senior executive at Toyota who said, open source is the wave of the future. We need to reduce costs. One way to reduce costs amongst our tier ones is to share software. If you have they looked around. They said, hey, we have Panasonic who has their own Linux platform. Denso has their Linux platform. Aishin has their Linux platform. This is crazy. We're paying them all to do the same thing. Once Toyota, I'm going to say especially Toyota, bought in, they pushed their whole tier one base and said, you need to go work on this. And then Toyota also was very influential in making the decision when AGL first started. We had a model where you could join for cash, it wasn't very expensive, or you could contribute less cash or even no cash, but contribute a number of engineers, FTEs. The problem when I came on board in 2014 was nobody was tracking these FTEs, what they were doing or how much work they were putting in. I found out that none of them were actually contributing the number of FTEs that they were promising. And in most cases, they weren't working on anything that was useful for us. So once we switched to a cash model, because they basically at that point, Toyota and some of the other OEMs, and in fact Panasonic too, said it's much easier for us to contribute cash and have you hire contractors to do the work. And now, in the last 10 years, some of the companies have gotten much better about their open source practices, and they have OSPOs. Panasonic, Toyota, Aishin, and a few others have made some really great contributions on their own. But it started off with really a senior executive at a major automotive manufacturer, in this case, Toyota, and he, through his influence and the hard work of people on the project, we basically pushed it forward. There was this idea of we would have our own distribution, and the upstream we were relying on was not very good. And the other idea was kind of an idea that I had used at Continental. When I got to Continental, there were people there who were like toying around with Linux, and they were doing some quotes on Linux, but they hadn't won any work. So it was, okay, come in and form a Linux platform team. And what I was able to do was hire people. This is kind of what we did in AGL using contractors. We have a lot of people who know cars. We don't have a lot of people who are deeply involved in open source, and marry those, that as one group. And we were able to get a lot of productivity out of both sets of people. And they were able to learn from each other. And again, getting buy-in that way from our members has been, I think somebody was saying that they had never seen, he was saying that seeing Ford and GM in the same room. Well, I had the same experience in about 2016 or 2017. All of a sudden, we had Panasonic, Denso, Renesas, Aishin, Toyota, all working together on the same applications in the same room, which I from my experience with tier ones and OEMs was never going to happen. I think we got another couple minutes. Is there any more questions, or we can wrap it up? Or comments, or great thoughts? We have a great thought.
Well, it's great. I was just wondering if AGL was going to pick up that kernel that Red Hat certified recently.
There's no reason why not. But the problem that AGL has, and this is kind of what I was talking about in the end of my fifth lesson yesterday, is we are very reliant on vendor kernels, right? So we get a board from Renesas, or we get a board from NXP, or from whoever, and there's always been, and I've been trying to figure out this gap for 15 years, both in automotive and in the cell phone space. But when I was working at Motorola, there's always this gap between the bleeding edge kernels or the LTS kernels and getting them downstream. And the disconnect for us is the board vendors, even if Yocto incorporates the latest kernel into their LTS, it's not necessarily in all of the BSPs, especially it doesn't get into the board vendor VSPs. And so somehow we have to figure out how to incorporate those updates into our kernels. So having said that, if somebody wanted to say, create a board BSP based on that Red Hat kernel, we'd be more than happy to take it. At some point we're reliant on people actually stepping up and doing the work, but there's no reason why we wouldn't do it.
If nobody else has anything else, I've got a question for the room. What do you guys think about the kernel configuration fragment system in Yocto?
Isn't there a Yocto BoF later or not? So I'll tell you.
Not that I know about.
So actually, I'll give you an opportunity here. Tomorrow morning, there is the Yocto member meeting that I will be attending, and so if you want to comment on that, and I will take your feedback to the Yocto members. And one of the things that we're discussing is the roadmap. So if there's roadmap things you want us to go look at, I'm happy. We are, in my opinion, we are and we should be looking for feedback from our users in the Yocto community on stuff like that. So
My 2 cents is I have a really hard time finding out what fragments exist, what they do, where they're defined, and it feels kind of bad, but I don't know if that's just a me thing.
He was asking me almost the same question yesterday. All right, we got to go now.
I think the fragment system is actually really good. It incorporates a lot of stuff together and kind of merges it. The logs for how that gets merged can be kind of difficult to find. I think that as Yocto's moving forward, those logs seem to be becoming a little bit more transparent. But one of the large issues is, I think, the meta NXP layer, so there's all these different steps for combining kernel fragments together, and then at the very end, Meta NXP has thrown in their own kernel config step, which just slams a specific def config over the top of this nicely generated.
I will just say, and this is what I said to you yesterday,
Yeah.
Meta NXP is the worst example of a set of BSP layers. I mean, I'm not even kidding. We have so much difficult with NXP stuff. Yeah, well, we don't deal with Qualcomm because they won't talk to us, and they're members, but they don't make. We haven't really had to deal with their stuff. I understand their stuff is really difficult too in talking to people, but for the public boards, for NXP, man, their stuff is a mess.
Yeah, and then there's one other change that I think I'll probably bring it up tomorrow at that Yocto get together, but it turns out that the kernel config fragments that are actually used in the system, right, they get copied over into the working directory of each recipe, but the actual config fragments that are used from your source directory, which I don't really agree with. For some other reasons with some of the Linux kernel configuration options, which gets a little tricky. But I think overall it's a really good system that's moving in the right direction. Those are my thoughts.
Can I ask which version of Yocto you're using?
I'm moving to Scarthgap right now from Thud, unfortunately.
From where?
From Thud.
Oh.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
What are you using?
We're on Kernel right now.
Okay, that's reasonable.
Yeah.
Okay, I guess we're gonna wrap it up. Thank you, everybody. This has really been great.